It's not every day you find yourself explaining to two somewhat bewildered police officers why the brand new sapphire blue velvet L-shaped sectional, currently half in, half out of your moving truck, still partially swaddled in protective plastic, is, in fact, yours, especially when a woman with impeccably coiffed silver hair, dripping in what looked suspiciously like real diamonds even at 2 in the afternoon, is shrieking from her perfectly manicured lawn that you're a common thief attempting to abscond with her custom-ordered masterpiece. How did I get here? Well, that's a story that still makes my blood pressure simmer. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because this one's a wild ride. And trust me, you'll want to buckle up for the tale of how President Priscilla Periwinkle, the undisputed queen of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association, met her match over a piece of furniture she'd never even seen before. It started, as these things often do, with a simple desire for comfort and a touch of style in my new, hard-earned home. I'd closed on the modest 3-bedroom ranch in Oakhaven Estates just a month prior, lured by the mature trees, the decent school district for future considerations, and what I initially perceived as a well-maintained, peaceful neighborhood. I should have paid more attention to the hushed warnings from my realtor about the rather particular HOA president, but hindsight, as they say, is a smug companion. My old sofa, a relic from my bachelor pad days, had seen better decades, and its brown corduroy was an affront to the fresh, airy aesthetic I was aiming for. After weeks of online research, showroom visits, and careful budgeting, I'm a project manager by trade. Meticulous planning is practically a hobby. I'd finally splurged on the aforementioned sapphire blue velvet sectional. It was bold, beautiful, and promised countless hours of blissful lounging. The delivery guys, bless their hard-working souls, had carefully loaded it onto the rented flatbed truck I'd procured for the day, as the furniture store's own delivery service had a 3-week wait list, and my impatience, for once, trumped my planning. My friend Dave, who owed me a few favors, was helping, and we were making good progress, carefully maneuvering the larger chaise section towards my open garage. That's when the first sign of impending doom appeared, rolling silently to a stop across the street in a pristine, white Cadillac Escalade that seemed to gleam with an almost sentient disapproval. President Priscilla Periwinkle, or Prissy P, as I'd later come to internally, and sometimes not so internally, refer to her, emerged. She was a vision in pastel pink athleisure wear that probably cost more than my entire monthly mortgage payment. Her face a mask of serene condescension, framed by perfectly coiffed silver hair that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. Her eyes, magnified by large, expensive-looking sunglasses, scanned the scene, my slightly disheveled self, Dave in his equally sweaty t-shirt, the glorious sapphire sofa, and the decidedly unfancy rental truck. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice smooth but with an underlying edge, like polished granite. "I don't believe I've seen this vehicle approved for commercial deliveries on a residential street during these hours. Are you residents, or are you conducting unauthorized business?" Her gaze lingered on the truck as if it were personally offending her property values. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. "Good afternoon. I'm Mark Thompson. I just moved into number 47. This is my friend Dave. And this," I gestured dramatically towards the sofa, "is my new couch. Just bringing it home." A small, polite smile from me. Dave offered a little wave. Priscilla's lips thinned. "Number 47? The Henderson property. I wasn't aware it had sold so quickly. The HOA requires new resident registration within 7 days, Mr. Thompson. I trust you'll be attending to that promptly at the management office." "Yes, ma'am. It's on my to-do list for tomorrow," I assured her, trying to remain chipper. "Just wanted to get this beast unloaded while I had the truck and the manpower." She took a step closer, her eyes now fixated on the sapphire velvet. A strange expression flickered across her face. Was it covetousness? Or just pure, unadulterated suspicion? "That's a rather unique piece of furniture," she observed. The word unique laced with something that wasn't quite a compliment. "Quite large. Are you sure it will even fit through your doorway?" "Oh, we measured," Dave chimed in cheerfully. "It'll be tight, but she'll go." Prissy P ignored Dave entirely. Her focus was solely on me, and now, on the sofa itself. "Where did you acquire such an item?" she asked, her tone shifting from merely officious to interrogative. I felt a prickle of annoyance. "From Miller's Fine Furniture downtown, ma'am. It's brand new." I even patted the plastic wrap for emphasis. "We have the receipt in the truck, if you'd like to see it for HOA inventory purposes," I added, a touch of sarcasm creeping in despite my best efforts. Her eyes narrowed. "Miller's, you say? That's interesting. Because that particular L-shaped sectional, in that exact sapphire blue velvet, looks identical, and I mean identical, to a custom piece I ordered several months ago, from a boutique in the city. It was due for delivery this week, to my storage unit, mind you, but there might have been a mix-up." My jaw, and Dave's, metaphorically hit the pavement. "Ma'am, with all due respect," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "This is definitely my sofa. I picked it out myself. I have the order forms, the payment confirmation, everything." I gestured towards the cab of the truck. It was a floor model clearance, actually. Hence the good deal and the immediate availability. This was a slight fib. It wasn't a floor model, but I thought emphasizing its immediate possession might make her reconsider her bizarre claim. It didn't. "Floor model?" she sniffed. "Highly unlikely for a piece of that caliber. You see, Mr. Thompson, items of that value are rarely just left for general sale without prior commitments. And I have been expecting something extraordinarily similar." She circled the chaise lounge section slowly, like a vulture sizing up its prey. "It even has that slight imperfection in the velvet nap right there on the armrest, just as the designer warned me it might." I looked. There was indeed a tiny, almost invisible scuff, probably from the loading process. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Dave looked at me, his eyebrows raised to his hairline, mouthing, "Is she serious?" I shrugged helplessly. "President Periwinkle," I said, trying a more formal approach, "I can assure you, this sofa was purchased by me, for my home. Perhaps the one you ordered is still on its way to your storage unit. These things can look similar." Her chin jutted out. "Don't patronize me, young man. I know what I ordered, and I know what I'm looking at. This is a very serious matter. You are in possession of what appears to be my property, and given the circumstances, new, unregistered resident, unmarked rental truck, furtive unloading." She let the insinuation hang in the air. "Furtive?" Dave interjected, clearly offended. "We're sweating our guts out in broad daylight, lady." "Precisely," she snapped. "Brazen. I'm afraid I have no choice but to call the authorities to sort this out." My mind reeled. Call the cops? Over a sofa, she just decided, on a whim. Was hers? "Are you actually serious?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my resolve to remain calm. "You're going to call the police because you think my new sofa is yours? I have the paperwork right here." I moved towards the truck cab. "Stay right where you are," she commanded, already pulling a jewel-encrusted iPhone from her pocket. "I don't want you tampering with any paperwork. The police can determine its authenticity. This is potentially grand larceny, Mr. Blanks, Mr. Blanks, Mr. Blanks, Mr. Blanks. Thompson." And just like that, she was dialing, her voice adopting a melodramatic, slightly panicked tone as she spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes, I need officers at 47 Oak Haven Drive immediately. There's a man here. I believe he's stolen a very valuable piece of furniture. Yes, from me. He's trying to take it into the house now." She shot me a look of triumph. Dave was apoplectic. I was just stunned. The sheer, unadulterated gall of this woman was something I'd only read about in internet forums. Within 10 minutes, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers, looking professional but with that "here we go again with a neighborhood dispute" air about them, stepped out. Priscilla Periwinkle rushed towards them, a torrent of accusations pouring out. "Officers, thank heavens, this man, he's got my sofa, my custom-ordered sapphire sectional. He's trying to claim it's his." And so began the most surreal afternoon of my life, all because I decided to upgrade my living room. The fight for the sapphire sectional was only just beginning, and I had a sinking feeling President Periwinkle wasn't just after a piece of furniture. She was after a demonstration of her absolute, unchallengeable authority in Oakhaven Estates. She had picked the wrong new resident to mess with. The officers, a younger, somewhat stern-faced Officer Ramirez, and an older, more world-weary Officer Miller, no relation to the furniture store, thankfully, though the irony wasn't lost on me, listened patiently to President Periwinkle's dramatic retelling. She painted a picture of a cunning thief, brazenly attempting to spirit away her prized possession in broad daylight. She emphasized her position as HOA president, as if that lent her accusation an extra layer of unimpeachable truth. She pointed to the distinctive features of the sofa, features she had, of course, only become aware of minutes before, by observing my sofa. My blood was boiling, but I knew from past, albeit far less bizarre, encounters with bureaucracy that losing my cool would be counterproductive. I, a project manager who lived by Gantt charts and risk assessments, was being accused of furniture theft by a woman who seemed to operate on pure, unfiltered ego. When Officer Ramirez finally turned to me, his expression was neutral, a practiced mask of impartiality that nonetheless made me feel like I was already halfway to a jail cell. "Sir," he began, "could you please explain your side of this?" Dave, bless his loyal heart, started to sputter. "This is insane, officer. We just picked this up from Miller's. It's his. He paid for it." But I put a calming hand on his arm. "Officer Ramirez, Officer Miller," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of outrage vibrating through me. "My name is Mark Thompson. I am the new owner of this house, number 47 Oakhaven Drive. I closed on it last month. This sapphire blue velvet L-shaped sectional sofa," I gestured towards the magnificent, yet contentious piece of upholstery, "was purchased by me from Miller's Fine Furniture on Tuesday. I have the sales receipt, the credit card statement, and the order confirmation email, all with my name, my address, and a full description of this exact item." I pulled out my phone. "I can show you the email confirmation right now, dated 3 weeks ago, confirming the special order and estimated pickup." Priscilla scoffed dramatically from the sidelines. "Emails can be faked, receipts can be forged. He probably found it discarded and printed up some bogus paperwork." Officer Miller, who had been silently observing, spoke up, his voice rumbling. "Ma'am, we'll look at any evidence Mr. Thompson has. Mr. Thompson, if you could show us that email?" I quickly pulled it up, enlarging the screen so they could clearly see the Miller's Fine Furniture letterhead, my name, the item description, sapphire velvet L-shaped sectional, SKU 74B927, the price, and the pickup date. Officer Ramirez examined it closely. "And you have a physical receipt as well?" "Yes, sir. It's in the glove compartment of the rental truck, along with the rental agreement for the truck itself, also in my name." I paused, then added, "And I have the original store tags that were attached to the sofa, which we removed just before loading it. They're in there too." Priscilla was practically vibrating with indignation. "But it looks exactly like mine. The one I described to you? The slight imperfection on the armrest? How do you explain that, Mr. Thompson?" "Ma'am," Officer Miller interjected, his patience clearly thinning, "coincidences happen. Lots of furniture looks alike. That imperfection could have occurred during transit." He turned back to me. "Do you mind if we see the receipt in your truck?" "Not at all," I said, already moving. Dave and I retrieved the folder from the glove compartment. I handed over the crisp, multi-part sales receipt from Miller's, prominently displaying my name, address, the date of purchase, and the itemized sofa. I also handed over the thick cardboard store tags. Officer Ramirez took them, comparing the details on the receipt to the tags, and then to the email on my phone. They matched perfectly. "And you said this was a custom order, Mrs. Periwinkle?" Officer Ramirez asked, turning back to her. "From which store did you order it?" Priscilla hesitated for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her facade of absolute certainty. "It was Le Chic Chateau Boutique downtown, a very exclusive place. They only do custom work for select clients." She puffed herself up slightly. "I have the order confirmation at home, on my other computer." Her initial story about it being redirected from a storage unit seemed to have evaporated. I see, Officer Ramirez said non-committally. And what was your delivery date for this custom piece? It was this week. They were supposed to call me to finalize, she improvised, a little less confidently now. Her eyes darted towards the sofa, as if willing it to sprout a label bearing her name. The officers exchanged a glance. I could almost hear their internal dialogue. Another messy he said, she said. Officer Miller then addressed me. Mr. Thompson, this is obviously a contentious situation. Mrs. Periwinkle is insistent this is her property. And I am equally insistent, officer, I replied, my voice firm but respectful, that it is mine, purchased legally, and with ample documentation to prove it. Documentation she clearly lacks for this specific item. Priscilla let out an indignant gasp. I will have my proof. I just need to retrieve it. For now, Officer Ramirez said, his tone becoming more decisive. Given that Mr. Thompson has provided immediate proof of purchase with his name and this address, and you, Mrs. Periwinkle, state your proof is elsewhere. The preponderance of evidence currently favors Mr. Thompson's claim of ownership of this particular sofa. My heart gave a little leap of relief. However, he continued, and my stomach dropped again, to de-escalate the situation and allow Mrs. Periwinkle the opportunity to produce her alleged documentation, we're going to make a recommendation. Mr. Thompson, can you temporarily store the sofa in your garage or inside your house, out of public view, for the next 24 hours? And Mrs. Periwinkle, you will use that time to produce concrete proof, a dated sales receipt, an order confirmation from Le Chic Chateau Boutique, with a matching description and your name, that this specific sofa is yours. If you can do that, we can revisit the matter. If not, then the sofa remains with Mr. Thompson. I wasn't thrilled. It was my sofa. I shouldn't have to jump through hoops because of her delusion. But I also recognized the cops were trying to be fair, or at least appear to be, while giving Prissy enough rope to hopefully hang herself. Arguing further might make me look unreasonable. All right, officers, I conceded with a sigh. We can move it into the garage. It's mostly empty. Excellent, Officer Ramirez said, clearly relieved to have found a temporary solution. Mrs. Periwinkle, you have until 3 p.m. tomorrow to provide your proof to us at the station, or directly to Mr. Thompson if you can resolve this amicably amongst yourselves, though perhaps involving a third-party mediator from the HOA might be wise. He clearly didn't hold out much hope for the amicable part. Priscilla looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. 24 hours? That's hardly enough time to contact my exclusive designer. But very well. I will prove that this interloper, she glared at me, is attempting to defraud me. She then spun on her heel and marched back to her Escalade, muttering about the decline of neighborhood vigilance. The officers gave Dave and me a nod. Try to keep the peace, folks, Officer Miller advised, with a slight emphasis that suggested he knew who the likely disturber of said peace would be. Then they were gone, leaving Dave and me standing there with my half-unloaded, now highly controversial, sapphire sectional. Dude, Dave said, shaking his head. That woman is certifiable. Le Chic Chateau Boutique? Seriously? Sounds like a poodle groomer. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You have no idea, Dave. This is the HOA president. I have a feeling this is just the appetizer. We wrestled the remaining sections of the sofa off the truck and into my garage, a Herculean task made more irritating by the circumstances. The beautiful blue velvet seemed to mock me from beneath its plastic shroud. As I locked the garage door, I made a vow. Priscilla Periwinkle wanted a fight over a sofa? Fine. But she was going to find out that this project manager did his homework, documented everything, and never, ever, backed down from a challenge when he knew he was in the right. My mind was already whirring, formulating a plan. Stage 1, secure my evidence. Stage 2, investigate Le Chic Chateau Boutique. Stage 3, find out just how deep Prissy P's delusion, or maliciousness, actually ran. This wasn't just about a sofa anymore. This was about principle, and a little bit about the sheer, unadulterated joy I anticipated in proving her spectacularly, publicly wrong. The battle of the blue velvet sectional had officially commenced, and I was arming for suburban warfare. My initial anger began to solidify into a cold, determined resolve. She had accused me of theft, involved the police, and publicly humiliated me in front of my new neighbors, some of whom had been peeking curiously from behind their curtains during the whole spectacle. This wasn't going to just blow over. The rest of that Saturday was a blur of activity, but not the kind I had planned, the kind involving assembling flat-pack bookcases and arranging knickknacks. Instead, Dave and I, after he'd been suitably revived with pizza and beer, meticulously went over every piece of documentation I had related to the sofa. We photographed the receipts, the store tags, the delivery paperwork for the rental truck. I took detailed photos of the sofa itself in my garage, capturing every angle, every seam, and, yes, even the tiny imperfection on the armrest that Priscilla had so brazenly claimed as proof of her ownership. The metadata on those digital photos, time-stamped and geologged, would be irrefutable. I then called Miller's Fine Furniture. I spoke to Sarah, the sales associate who had handled my purchase. She remembered me and the sapphire sectional clearly. "Oh, the blue velvet one? Yes, Mr. Thompson. Gorgeous choice. Did it arrive okay?" I explained the situation, trying to keep the sheer lunacy of it from making me sound unhinged myself. Sarah was appalled. She said she ordered it? From somewhere else? That's impossible. We had that specific model as a new line feature. It wasn't even available for custom order through us in that configuration until last month, and you were one of the first to get it. It's our Azure Dream model, SKU 74B-927. We definitely don't supply Le Chic Chateau Boutique, whoever they are. Bingo. This was good. Sarah, I asked, would it be possible to get a letter from the store manager, on company letterhead, confirming my purchase, the date, the item description, and specifically stating that this model was exclusive to your new line and perhaps clarifying your store has no wholesale dealings with a Le Chic Chateau Boutique? "Let me talk to Mr. Henderson, the manager," she said, her voice full of helpful indignation. "This sounds like a crazy person trying to bully you. We get weird calls sometimes, but never someone trying to claim furniture off the street." Within the hour, Mr. Henderson himself called me back. He was equally supportive and promised to have a notarized letter prepared for me by Monday morning. He even offered to check their statewide customer database for anyone named Priscilla Periwinkle or any orders matching that description from Le Chic Chateau Boutique, if it even existed and they somehow cross-supplied, which he highly doubted. This was turning out better than I hoped. My project manager brain was loving the accumulation of solid data. Next on the list, Le Chic Chateau Boutique. A quick Google search yielded nothing. Absolutely zero furniture stores, boutiques, or design studios in the city, or even the state, by that name. There was a Chic Chateau Pet Spa in a town 3 counties over, which gave Dave another round of laughter. "Maybe she thinks her poodle ordered it through them," he chortled. This lack of existence for her supposed supplier was another nail in Prissy P's coffin. I documented my fruitless search with screenshots and timestamps. Sunday morning, I decided to do a bit of recon. Under the guise of a friendly new neighbor walk, I strolled past Priscilla's house, an imposing 2-story colonial, naturally the largest on the block, with a garden that looked like it was tended by a small army of professionals. Her white Escalade was parked in the driveway, gleaming ostentatiously. I saw no signs of any other furniture deliveries. Later that day, while coincidentally checking my mail when Prissy P was retrieving hers, I offered a polite but cool, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Periwinkle. Any luck finding that paperwork for the sofa?" She shot me a glare that could curdle milk. "My designer is out of the country until Tuesday, Mr. Thompson. You'll just have to be patient." The truth will prevail. Her voice was dripping with arrogant certainty, but there was a slight tremor in it, a flicker in her eyes that suggested panic rather than confidence. Out of the country. I murmured to myself as I walked away. How convenient. The 24-hour deadline given by the police would expire at 3 p.m. that afternoon. I fully expected her not to show up at the station. And indeed, when I called Officer Miller around 4 p.m., on his non-emergency line, of course, he confirmed that Mrs. Periwinkle had not made contact, nor had she provided any documentation whatsoever regarding the sofa. He sounded unsurprised. Looks like it's your sofa, Mr. Thompson. Officially. Try to enjoy it. Enjoy it I would, but the war, I sensed, was far from over. Priscilla Periwinkle was not the type to accept defeat gracefully, especially not a public one. Her ego was far too invested. Monday morning, I picked up the notarized letter from Mr. Henderson at Miller's Fine Furniture. It was a masterpiece of polite but firm declaration of fact, confirming my purchase in painstaking detail and explicitly stating they had no record of, or affiliation with, any entity known as Le Chic Chateau Boutique. It also restated that the Azure Dream sectional was a new signature line, effectively negating any claim that someone else could have custom-ordered an identical one months prior from a different, non-existent vendor. I made several copies. This document felt like a shield, or perhaps more accurately, a perfectly crafted spear. Later that day, the first salvo from the HOA arrived. Tucked into my mailbox was an official-looking envelope bearing the Oakhaven Estates HOA logo. Inside, a curt, professionally printed letter. It was a violation notice. Dear Mr. Thompson. It began, "It has come to the attention of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors that you are in violation of Article 4, Section 3B of the Community Bylaws. Storage of unsightly items. Specifically, a large, non-operational vehicle, rental moving truck, license plate, my rental truck's plate, was parked on a residential street for a period exceeding 2 hours on Saturday date. Furthermore, household goods, furniture, were left exposed in an open garage, visible from the street, for an extended duration on Saturday, date and Sunday, date. Contrary to community standards of property upkeep, a fine of 100 for each violation, 100 for each violation, 100 for each violation, 200 total, is hereby levied. Failure to remit payment within 15 days will result in further penalties. Signed, Priscilla Periwinkle, President, Oakhaven Estates HOA. I had to laugh. It was so petty, so transparently retaliatory. The truck was gone by Saturday evening. The sofa was in my closed garage. Exposed in an open garage visible from the street, likely referred to the minutes Dave and I had the door open while maneuvering the damned thing, or perhaps while the police were there, an event she precipitated. This wasn't just about the sofa anymore. She was using her HOA power to harass me. My project manager mind kicked into high gear. Phase 1, Operation Sofa Liberation, was complete. Phase 2, Operation Prissy P Takedown, was now unofficially underway. This violation notice was her declaration of continued hostilities. My notarized letter, my photographs, my research into the non-existent Le Chic Chateau Boutique, these were my initial armaments, but I sensed I'd need more. I needed to understand the battlefield. I needed allies, and I needed to find Priscilla Periwinkle's real vulnerabilities. Because her audacious attempt at furniture theft and this retaliatory fine were symptoms of a much deeper problem, a tyrant who believed herself untouchable. I carefully filed a violation notice in a new folder I labeled HOA Shenanigans. It was getting thicker by the day. The coming week promised to be interesting. I wondered if Prissy P had any idea just how thoroughly she was motivating me to dig. My first step in Operation Prissy P Takedown was to actually comply with one of her earlier demands, formally registering as a new resident with the HOA. Not because I was intimidated by her, but because I wanted access to the HOA's governing documents, the full bylaws, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC, rupees, meeting minutes, financial statements, anything I could get my hands on. Knowledge is power, and I suspected Priscilla's kingdom was built on a foundation of residents' ignorance or apathy regarding these very documents. The HOA management office was a small, sterile space in a nearby strip mall, manned by a perpetually flustered-looking woman named Carol, who seemed to wilt slightly when I mentioned I lived in Oakhaven Estates. "Oh, President Periwinkle's community," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if uttering the name too loudly might summon the woman herself. I registered, paid the nominal administrative fee, and politely requested copies of all publicly available HOA documents. Carol hesitated. "Well, the bylaws and CC rupees are standard issue, of course. Meeting minutes, those are usually distributed by President Periwinkle after board approval. And financials, those are presented at the annual meeting. Are they not available for review by members at other times, as per state sunshine laws for HOAs?" I asked, employing a bit of jargon I'd picked up from some late-night research into HOA governance. I didn't actually know the specific sunshine laws for our state offhand, but it sounded official. Carol blinked. I suppose so. President Periwinkle usually handles those requests directly. She likes to ensure members understand the context. I'm quite adept at understanding context, I assured her with a smile that I hoped conveyed friendly determination rather than impending doom for her boss. "Perhaps you could just point me to where they are filed?" I wouldn't want to bother President Periwinkle unnecessarily. After a bit more gentle prodding, and my assurance that I was perfectly capable of navigating a filing cabinet, Carol reluctantly produced a binder labeled Oakhaven Meeting Minutes, Archive, and another much slimmer one titled Annual Financial Summaries. She practically insisted on making copies for me herself, probably to ensure I didn't walk off with originals or see something Prissy wouldn't want seen. I thanked her profusely and left with a treasure trove of potential ammunition. That evening, with a fresh pot of coffee brewing and my new sapphire sectional finally gracing my living room, looking absolutely stunning, I might add, a silent testament to my initial victory, I dove into the HOA documents. It was like reading a script for a suburban drama. The bylaws were dense, full of legalese, but also ripe with potential tripwires for an overzealous president. The CCRs were a minefield of petty restrictions, some reasonable, many utterly archaic or subjective, but the real gold was in the meeting minutes and the sparse financial summaries. The minutes, stretching back 3 years, the period of Prissy's current reign as president, were meticulously typed, but also suspiciously vague in places. Decisions were often attributed to board consensus without detailing votes. Expenditures were listed, but often under broad categories like Landscaping Enhancement Project or Community Improvement Initiative, with hefty, round numbers. I cross-referenced these with the financial summaries. The Landscaping Enhancement Project, for instance, which apparently cost $15,000 last spring, didn't seem to correspond to any noticeable improvement in the common areas when I'd toured the neighborhood. The only significant new planting I'd seen was an elaborate rose garden directly in front of Priscilla Periwinkle's house, on what was technically HOA common property but conveniently made her front yard look like Versailles. Coincidence? I made a note. I also noticed a recurring line item, legal consultation fees. These fees were surprisingly high and frequent for a supposedly peaceful suburban enclave. What legal battles was Oakhaven Estates constantly fighting? Or, more accurately, what battles was Prissy P. initiating on the HOA's dime? The financial summaries also revealed that HOA dues had increased by 15% 2 years ago and another 10% last year, justified by rising operational costs. Yet, services seemed to be, if anything, declining, according to some grumbling I'd overheard during the sofa fiasco. My next step was quiet diplomacy, or, more accurately, intelligence gathering from my new neighbors. I started with Mr. Henderson, the elderly gentleman from whom I'd bought my house. I invited him over for coffee, ostensibly to ask about local handymen, but I gently steered the conversation towards the HOA. Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant with a sharp mind and a twinkle in his eye, was a font of information. Priscilla Periwinkle, he said, shaking his head with a wry smile. She's a piece of work, that one. Been president for 5 years now, not 3. Consolidated her power base early. Treats the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Her husband, poor fellow, just tries to stay invisible. He confirmed my suspicions about the rose garden. Oh yes, the Periwinkle Memorial Rose Garden, as some of us call it. Planted with HOA funds, on common land, tended by the HOA's landscapers. But don't you dare let your dog sniff near it. She got old Mrs. Albright fined $50 for her poodle desecrating the petals. He told me about other instances of Prissy's overreach. Fines for incorrectly colored holiday lights. Demands that residents repaint their perfectly fine front doors to shades she personally approved. And a legendary battle over a child's treehouse that she deemed architecturally incongruous with community aesthetics. Many of us just pay the fines to avoid the hassle, Mr. Henderson admitted. She'll make your life miserable if you cross her. Sends endless letters, calls special meetings, even tries to get the city involved over trivial things. This sounded depressingly familiar. I showed him the violation notice I'd received. He chuckled grimly. Retaliation, plain and simple. She can't stand being challenged. You stood up to her over that sofa, and now you're a target. He then dropped a very interesting tidbit. There was a fellow on the board, Tom Albright, Mrs. Albright's son. He tried to question some of her spending a couple of years ago. Suddenly, he was hit with a string of violations for his property. Grass too long by a quarter inch, that sort of nonsense. He resigned from the board in frustration. Might be worth talking to him if you can find him. He moved out last year, I think. Tom Albright. Another note from my growing file. Over the next week, I subtly approached other neighbors. Some were wary, clearly intimidated by Prissy. Others, behind closed doors and whispered confidences, shared their own stories of woe. There was the young couple who were fined for leaving their bins out an hour too long after pickup. The family who received a warning because their basketball hoop was visually disruptive. A pattern emerged. Priscilla Periwinkle ruled by fear and selective enforcement of the Byzantine rules, many of which seemed to be interpreted, or even invented, on her whim. The common thread was her absolute intolerance for any perceived slight to her authority or aesthetic sensibilities. Her expensive Escalade wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of her dominion, cruising the streets as she inspected her subjects. Her perfectly coiffed hair wasn't just a hairstyle. It was a crown. I also continued my documentation. I took photos of the Periwinkle Memorial Rose Garden, noting its pristine condition compared to some of the genuinely communal flower beds, which looked a bit neglected. I started a log of Prissy's patrols, noting how often her Escalade would slowly cruise past my house. My own security cameras, initially installed for peace of mind, were now valuable intelligence assets. One evening, while reviewing footage from my front door camera, I caught something interesting. It was Priscilla, walking her fluffy white Bichon Frise, which, incidentally, was never on a leash, a clear violation of HOA rules she undoubtedly fined others for. As she passed my driveway, where Dave's older, slightly battered, but perfectly legal and street-parked sedan was parked while he was over helping me assemble a particularly stubborn IKEA bookcase, she paused. She took out her phone and blatantly photographed Dave's car and license plate. The next day, Dave, who lived 2 streets over but still within Oakhaven Estates, received an HOA violation notice for parking a vehicle in a state of disrepair on a public thoroughfare, diminishing community aesthetic value. The fine? $75. This was beyond petty. It was malicious. She was now targeting my friends. This lit a fire under me. Prissy P. wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a vindictive bully who was abusing her power for personal vendettas. My initial goal of just defending myself had evolved. Now, I was determined to dismantle her reign. The evidence was mounting. Suspicious financial dealings, a pattern of harassment and selective enforcement, and now, clear targeting of my associates. The next HOA general meeting was in 3 weeks. I circled the date on my calendar. It was time to prepare for a showdown. Priscilla Periwinkle had no idea what kind of detailed, data-driven, meticulously planned storm was about to break over her perfectly coiffed head. Her reign of error was about to be audited. The next couple of weeks were a whirlwind of quiet investigation and meticulous preparation. My project manager skills were in full overdrive. I created a detailed timeline of Priscilla Periwinkle's actions against me and Dave, cross-referencing them with dates and photographic evidence from my security cameras. I delved deeper into the HOA's financials, comparing the vague line items in the summaries Carol had given me with anecdotal evidence from neighbors about what actual work had or hadn't been done. The Community Improvement Initiative that cost $22,000 the previous year. Several long-term residents swore the only improvement they'd seen was a new, excessively ornate sign at the main entrance to Oakhaven Estates, featuring Priscilla's name prominently as Overseeing President. The cost for such a sign seemed wildly inflated. I tracked down Tom Albright, the former board member Mr. Henderson had mentioned. He was initially reluctant to talk, clearly scarred by his previous encounters with Prissy P. But when I explained my situation and shared some of my findings, particularly the financial oddities, he opened up. "She runs that board like a tyrant," Tom confirmed over coffee. "Any dissent is immediately squashed. The treasurer, Gregory Thwaite, is completely under her thumb. He just rubber stamps whatever she wants." I tried to get a detailed breakdown of the legal consultation fees once. They were astronomical. She claimed it was for sensitive ongoing litigation that couldn't be discussed. I suspect it was more about her personal vendettas against residents who dared to plant the wrong kind of pansies. Tom provided me with copies of old emails and agendas from his time on the board, which showed his polite but persistent questioning of expenditures, followed by the sudden flurry of nitpicky violation notices against him. It was a clear pattern of retaliation, beautifully documented. This was gold. He even remembered the name of the landscaping company that had installed the Periwinkle Memorial Rose Garden, Pedal Pushers, Inc. A quick call to Pedal Pushers, feigning interest in a similar project, got me an informal quote for a rose garden of that size. Their estimate was less than half of what Priscilla had apparently expensed to the HOA for the landscaping enhancement project. The plot and the budget discrepancies thickened. I realized that a direct confrontation at the HOA meeting, armed with only my own grievances, might be dismissed as sour grapes. I needed broader support. I needed to show that Prissy P's misdeeds weren't isolated incidents, but a systemic abuse of power affecting many. So I drafted a carefully worded, anonymous survey. It didn't mention Priscilla by name, but asked residents about their satisfaction with HOA management, transparency of financials, fairness of rule enforcement, and whether they had ever felt unfairly targeted by violation notices. I printed 100 copies and, late one Sunday night, Dave and I did a discreet community outreach mission, placing a survey and a pre-addressed, unstamped envelope into every mailbox in Oakhaven Estates. I set up a dedicated P.O. box to receive the replies, ensuring anonymity. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, my P.O. box was overflowing. Over 60% of the households responded. The picture painted was damning. Rampant dissatisfaction with Priscilla's leadership, concerns about escalating dues with no visible improvement in services, and numerous detailed accounts of unfair fines and harassment. Many respondents specifically named President Periwinkle as the source of their frustration. I spent hours collating the data, creating spreadsheets, charts, and anonymized summaries of the key complaints. The quantitative data was just as powerful as the anecdotal. I also focused on the legal consultation fees. I discovered through public records that the law firm the HOA supposedly had on retainer was Dewey, Cheatham, Howe, a name so cliché it had to be a joke. But it turned out to be a real, albeit small and somewhat obscure, firm. What was more interesting was that one of its partners, a Mr. Alistair Finch, was frequently seen playing golf with Priscilla Periwinkle's husband at the local country club. This didn't prove malfeasance, but it certainly smelled fishy, especially given the exorbitant and vaguely justified fees. My case was building. layer by meticulous layer. I had financial discrepancies, testimonies of retaliation, survey data showing widespread dissatisfaction, and evidence of her personal vendetta against me, starting with the great sapphire sofa heist attempt. I compiled everything into a master binder, tabbed and indexed. It was a thing of beauty, if I did say so myself, a project manager's dream of organized retribution. The day of the HOA general meeting arrived. It was held in the Oakhaven Community Clubhouse, a rather dated building that Priscilla probably had plans to enhance with more HOA funds. I got there early, choosing a seat in the middle, my binder discreetly in my briefcase. The room filled up, a much larger turnout than usual. I later heard, likely due to the anonymous surveys circulating, and a general sense of anticipation or dread. Priscilla Periwinkle presided, flanked by her loyal treasurer, Gregory Thwaite, who looked like a startled rabbit, and two other board members. One, a nervous-looking woman named Agnes, who avoided eye contact, and the other, a stoic man named Arthur, whose expression was unreadable. Prissy was in her element, dressed in a power suit, the color of dried blood, her silver hair and immovable helmet. She opened the meeting with a glowing report of her own achievements, emphasizing fiscal responsibility and maintaining community standards. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. She breezed through the agenda, clearly expecting no challenges. When she got to new business, she dismissively asked if there were any items. This was my cue. I raised my hand. Yes, President Periwinkle. Mark Thompson, 47 Oakhaven Drive. I have several items of new business. A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to me. Priscilla's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Thompson. Of course. Please be brief. We have a lot to cover. I will be as brief as the seriousness of the matters allows, I replied, my voice calm and clear. I stood up, my binder in hand. Firstly, I'd like to address the issue of several recent, and I believe retaliatory and unsubstantiated violation notices I and an associate have received, stemming directly from a disagreement I had with President Periwinkle regarding ownership of a piece of my personal property, a sapphire blue sofa, to be specific. A few gasps, a few chuckles from the audience. Prissy's face turned a shade darker than her suit. That matter was a misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson, and the violations were issued in accordance with standard procedure for documented infractions of HOA bylaws, she said icily. Was it standard procedure to accuse me of grand larceny and call the police, Mrs. Periwinkle, when I had all proof of purchase immediately available and you had none, for a sofa you claimed was yours from a non-existent store called Le Chateau Boutique? I laid out the notarized letter from Miller's Fine Furniture on the overhead projector I'd noted in the corner earlier and connected my laptop to. The letter, crisp and official, filled the screen. As confirmed by Miller's Fine Furniture, the sofa was mine, their new Azure Dream model, and they have no affiliation with your phantom supplier. The room was silent, save for the whir of the projector. Priscilla sputtered, This is an outrageous slander. That was a private matter, settled by the police. Settled in my favor, because your claim was baseless. I corrected, and immediately followed by these. I switched the projector to show copies of the violation notices sent to me and Dave, complete with dates clearly showing they were issued right after the sofa incident and the police confirming my ownership. Retaliation is not standard procedure, President Periwinkle. It is an abuse of power. Gregory Thwaite started to say something about maintaining decorum, but Priscilla waved him into silence, her eyes blazing. If you have a complaint, Mr. Thompson, there are official channels. Oh, I believe this is the official channel for matters concerning the governance and conduct of this HOA and its president, I stated firmly. Next, I'd like to discuss financial transparency, specifically some rather large and vaguely described expenditures. For instance, the landscaping enhancement project for 15-0. The only significant landscaping I've identified for that period was the rather elaborate rose garden primarily benefiting your personal property, President Periwinkle, a garden which, according to estimates from the installers, Pedal Pushers Inc. should have cost less than half that amount. I put up a comparison. The HOA ledger entry versus the Pedal Pushers estimate, and photos of the rose garden. More murmurs. Agnes, the nervous board member, was now looking decidedly green. Arthur, the stoic one, leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Priscilla was on her feet. This is preposterous. These are audited financials. You have no right to make such unfounded accusations. Then perhaps you can explain the discrepancy? I asked politely. Or the Community Improvement Initiative for 22-0, which seems to have solely produced a new entrance sign featuring your name rather prominently. Or the consistently high legal consultation fees paid to Dewey, Cheatham, Howe, a firm where a partner is a close associate of your husband. Fees which former board member Tom Albright was penalized for questioning. I put up Tom Albright's affidavit, detailing his experience. The room was buzzing now. Priscilla's carefully constructed composure was shattering. Her face was flushed, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was a strangled shriek. These are lies! Fabrications by a disgruntled newcomer! Security! Remove this man! But there was no security. Only Carol from the management office hovering nervously by the door, and about 70 increasingly angry-looking homeowners. That's when Mr. Henderson stood up. I think Mr. Thompson is raising some very valid questions, Priscilla. Questions many of us have had for years, but were too intimidated to ask. He held up his completed survey. I, for one, have had enough of the opaque finances and your tyrannical rule. Others started to stand, holding up their own survey forms. Yes, shouted a woman from the back. What about the assessment increases? Where is all that money going? My holiday lights fine was ridiculous, yelled another. The dam of polite fear had broken. Chaos erupted. Priscilla Periwinkle looked around wildly, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated her neighbors. Her perfectly ordered kingdom was crumbling around her, all because of a sapphire blue velvet sofa and a project manager who knew how to collect, organize, and present damning evidence. The showdown was in full swing, and Prissy P. was on the ropes. President Priscilla Periwinkle tried to regain control, banging her gavel so hard its wooden head threatened to fly off. Order! Order! This meeting is adjourned if you cannot maintain decorum, she shrieked, her voice cracking. But it was too late. The residents, emboldened by my presentation and years of pent-up frustration, were not to be silenced. Arthur, the stoic board member, finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the din. Priscilla, I think Mr. Thompson has raised legitimate concerns that require answers, not dismissal. These are serious allegations, backed by what appears to be substantial documentation. Agnes, the nervous board member, nodded faintly, looking like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. Gregory Thwaite, the treasurer, was stammering, Everything is perfectly in order, approved, standard practice, but his voice lacked conviction and was drowned out by residents demanding specifics. Where are the detailed invoices for these projects, Gregory? Someone shouted. Why were Tom Albright's questions ignored? Another called out. I held up my hand for quiet, and surprisingly, the room gradually settled. President Periwinkle, board members, I said, addressing them all. I'm not just here to complain. I'm here to propose solutions. Firstly, I formally request an independent forensic audit of the HOA's financials for the past 5 years, covering the entirety of President Periwinkle's tenure. A wave of yes. And hear, hear, swept through the room. Secondly, I continued, I held up a thick sheaf of papers. The collated, anonymized results of a neighborhood survey. Over 60% of households responded, and the findings indicate widespread dissatisfaction with the current board's transparency, fairness, and fiscal management. I placed a summary of the survey results on the projector. Charts clearly showed the high levels of discontent. Given these documented issues, the clear evidence of abuse of power, retaliation, and potential misuse of HOA funds, I believe it is time for a change in leadership. Therefore, I also call for a vote of no confidence in President Priscilla Periwinkle." The words hung in the air. Priscilla's face went from red to a startling pasty white. "A vote of no confidence? You can't do that. It's not on the agenda." "Actually, Priscilla," Arthur interjected, holding up a copy of the HOA bylaws I had conveniently provided to all board members earlier, highlighted at the relevant section. Article 7, Section 4, allows for a motion of no confidence to be raised from the floor during a general meeting if petitioned by at least 10% of members present. Given the show of hands earlier, I believe we easily meet that threshold. Mr. Henderson quickly organized a show of hands. Far more than 10% were raised in support of the motion. Priscilla looked desperately at Gregory, but he seemed to have shrunk into his chair, avoiding her gaze. Agnes was staring at her hands. Arthur looked at Priscilla. "The motion is valid. We will now proceed to a vote on the no confidence motion regarding President Periwinkle." Chaos reigned again, but this time it was an organized chaos. Slips of paper were distributed for a secret ballot. Carol, looking terrified but also strangely liberated, helped collect them in a Tupperware container someone produced. While the votes were being counted by Arthur, Agnes, and a now very pale Mr. Henderson, who insisted on being an impartial observer, the floor was open to further discussion, though discussion mostly consisted of residents airing more grievances against Prissy P., who sat stunned and silent, her reign visibly evaporating before her eyes. One resident recounted being fined for her children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. Another described Priscilla timing her dog walks with a stopwatch to try and catch violations of the 15-minute pet relief common area usage rule, a rule no one had ever seen in writing. The sheer pettiness was astounding. The evidence against her was not just in my binder, it was in the shared experiences of an entire community that had finally found its voice. The count was completed. Arthur stood. The room fell silent. "The results of the vote of no confidence in President Priscilla Periwinkle are as follows," he announced, his voice resonating with gravity. "Votes in favor of no confidence, 68. Votes against, 3. Abstentions, 1. A stunned silence, then an eruption of applause and cheers. Priscilla Periwinkle stared blankly ahead, as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. 68-3. It was a landslide. Her iron grip on Oakhaven Estates was shattered. Therefore," Arthur continued, "Priscilla Periwinkle is hereby removed from the office of President of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately." More cheers. Priscilla finally reacted. She pushed back her chair, her face contorted with rage. "This is illegal. A kangaroo court. You haven't heard the last of this. I'll sue every single one of you." She then grabbed her handbag and stormed out of the clubhouse, her expensive heels clicking angrily on the linoleum, the door slamming shut behind her. The Escalade was heard revving and peeling out of the parking lot moments later. Good riddance. The remaining board members, Arthur and a now surprisingly emboldened Agnes, Gregory having seemingly evaporated during the vote counting, looked at each other. "Well," Arthur said with a wry smile, "it appears we have a vacancy for president, and a pressing need for a forensic audit." The meeting continued for another hour, productively this time. An interim president was elected, Arthur, to no one's surprise and by unanimous acclaim. A committee was formed to oversee the independent audit, with Tom Albright and myself as volunteer consultants, given our demonstrated knack for sniffing out financial irregularities. Dates were set for special elections for new board members to fill vacancies and ensure broader representation. It felt like a revolution, albeit a very polite, suburban one. As the meeting adjourned, people came up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me. Old Mrs. Quote. Albright, whose poodle had been unfairly maligned, gave me a hug and a slightly squashed oatmeal raisin cookie from her purse. "You're a good boy, Mr. Thompson," she said. That Priscilla needed taking down a peg or 2, or 20. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The forensic audit, conducted by a reputable independent firm, uncovered a cesspool of mismanagement and petty corruption. The landscaping enhancement project and the Community Improvement Initiative were indeed wildly inflated, with significant portions of the funds untraceable or funneled into vague consulting fees paid to shell companies that seemed to lead back to, well, let's just say certain individuals with expensive tastes and a penchant for luxury SUVs. The legal consultation fees to Dewey Cheatham Howe were mostly for Priscilla sicking lawyers on residents over trivial disputes, often to the tune of thousands of dollars per frivolous letter. The audit recommended pursuing legal action to recover misappropriated funds. Priscilla Periwinkle, true to her word, did attempt to sue. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA, Arthur, Agnes, and me personally, for defamation and wrongful removal. However, her case was so laughably weak, especially in the face of the audit findings and the sheer volume of resident testimonies, that it was summarily dismissed by a judge who advised her to perhaps consider taking up a less stressful hobby. She also received a hefty bill from her own lawyers for that failed endeavor. She didn't just lose her presidency, she lost face, a considerable amount of her neighbors' money, which the HOA did begin proceedings to recover, and her iron grip on the community. The new HOA board, led by Arthur and with several new, reasonable members, including Sarah, the formerly intimidated board member who found her voice, and eventually Tom Albright, who was persuaded to return, immediately went to work reforming the rules. Vague and subjective bylaws were clarified or eliminated. The fine system was overhauled to be fair and transparent, with a clear appeals process. HOA meetings became actual forums for discussion, not decrees from on high. My initial violation notices were, of course, rescinded, along with Dave's. In fact, the board issued a formal apology to all residents who had been unfairly targeted by the previous regime, and a review process was set up for past fines. Many were refunded. The Periwinkle Memorial Rose Garden was subtly redesigned to be a more inclusive community space, with benches and a small plaque dedicating it to neighborhood unity. As for president, well, former President Priscilla Periwinkle, the last I heard, she and her husband had put their house up for sale. Apparently, living in a community where she was no longer queen, and where people openly discussed her malfeasance, was too much for her ego to bear. They moved to a gated community in another state, one renowned for its even stricter HOA, ironically. I sometimes wonder if she tried to claim someone else's furniture there. And my sapphire blue velvet L-shaped sectional? It remains the most comfortable and certainly the most memorable piece of furniture I've ever owned. Every time I lounge on it, I'm reminded that sometimes, standing up to a bully, armed with nothing but the truth, meticulous documentation, and a really great sofa, can change more than just your living room decor. It can change an entire community for the better. It took a lot of work, a lot of late nights poring over spreadsheets and bylaws, but seeing the relief and renewed sense of community in Oakhaven Estates made every bit of it worthwhile. So, if you're dealing with your own prissy P, remember this. Document everything. Know your rights. Gather your allies. And never underestimate the power of well-presented facts. Sometimes the pen, or in my case the laser printer outputting damning evidence, truly is mightier than the sword or the HOA president's gavel. Thanks for sticking with me through this crazy story. It just goes to show, you never know what adventures await when you're just trying to furnish your new home. Drop a comment if you've had your own HOA battles. I'd love to hear them.